Hi everybody, my name is Rica Fulton. I'm a restoration coordinator with RiversEdge West. Thank you so much for having me here today as part of your student showcase. I'm honored to be a part and see all the great research that's going on. So today I'm going to be talking about riparian restoration and the negative impact that invasive species have on healthy rivers here in Grand Junction and beyond. So I hope you enjoy the presentation, and I hope everyone's doing well. Congratulations on the end of another semester, and I hope to meet some of you in person someday.
So the title of my presentation today is River Restoration, Connecting Research and Community at RiversEdge West. So first I'm going to give a quick introduction of my background and how I found myself in this career to give an example of how education can translate into a specific career. Next, I'm going to talk about the component of healthy rivers in the Grand Valley and beyond. Following, I'll talk about how invasive riparian species and their impacts to rivers. Then I'll talk a little bit about RiversEdge West and our programs and watershed partnerships, an idea of what we do. And then finally, I'll talk about the importance of connecting research to practitioners and give a few examples of topics that we would love to have more research in to make our restoration efforts more effective. So as I said, my name's Rica. I'm originally from Durango, and I've always loved rivers. So I did my bachelor's degree at Fort Lewis College in Environmental Studies and GIS, which is Geographic Information Systems. And then after that, I went on to work at a geospatial firm. So I did some remote sensing and LiDAR work. But I always loved rivers, so I decided to move to Wyoming and get a master's degree at the University of Wyoming in geography and water resources, where I actually studied collaboration on the Dolores River, which if those folks not familiar is down in just south of us in southwest Colorado and flows into Utah and is a tributary of the Colorado River. So I went and did a bunch of interviews, and it was really focused on what makes or breaks collaboration, and I was just fascinated to know what stakeholders were thinking about the river and how they felt about collaboration and collaborative efforts. So following graduation, I was actually able to start working with RiversEdge West, and I now co-coordinate the Dolores River Restoration Partnership. So now I'm coordinating a collaborative group, which is exactly what I studied in school. So hopefully that's maybe a success story for folks going into the career field right now. So everyone knows, but the Colorado and Gunnison rivers are hugely significant to Grand Junction. The name itself, Grand Junction, refers to the junction of the Colorado and Gunnison rivers. Humans have lived here for 13,000 years, so most recently the Ute tribe, but tons and tons of indigenous peoples. It was in the 1880s when irrigation began occurring here in the Grand Valley, which is how our fruit trees and agricultural legacy really started. And it's just so important for wildlife, migratory birds, and endangered fish, and peoples alike. Here are a few old pictures. This is actually a ferry, which is where the 5th Street Bridge is now, and which is so fascinating to see the big wide river, even though it says it's at low water. And then this one is the machine that they were using to dig some of the canals that are here in town. So next I want to go over the components of healthy rivers. So the many, many things that lead to a healthy river. First is sediment transport and the ability of a river to move sediment, which means sand and rocks and boulders. And though that is so critical to the health of a river and leads to fish habitat and beaches and flood control and so many things that people might not always think about. Secondly is flow regimes, so the magnitude, frequency, and duration of flows in a river. It's the most prime example of that is how in the spring when all the snow is melting, there's a huge peak flow, which is so important for scouring the banks and creating habitat for fish and water for different vegetation species. And that change of river flows is something that makes a river really very healthy. If a river is flowing at the exact same flow the whole time, it's not going to connect to the same amount of habitat and provide the same amount of ecosystem services. Third is the importance of macroinvertebrates or bugs. That's a huge indicator of watershed health. So next time you're out the river and you see a lot of different kind of bugs, that's actually a good thing. Next is just, of course, it's a good habitat for fish, birds, and wildlife. Everyone needs a river. Next is the riparian area, so the vegetation surrounding the river. And then, of course, the human factors like recreation and agriculture, those things wouldn't exist in the richness that they do without healthy rivers. And then, of course, soil health and clean water and flood protection. So starting with this photo is good because it really illuminates the importance of riparian areas. It shows the great contrast between life in the arid Southwest and the lush area that surrounds rivers. A riparian area is just another word for riverside habitat, so those green strips of vegetation along the side of the river. Riparian areas are often referred to as ribbons of life because of the incredible amount of plant diversity and, as a result, wildlife diversity that they sustain. Only 1% of land in the U.S. is considered riparian, yet up to 80% of wildlife depend on it for food and shelter at some point in their lifetime. Almost all wildlife rely on these areas, and it's so important that they remain healthy and have the diverse native plants that wildlife need. So here's some examples of invasive riparian plants. First is tamarisk, or it's in some areas called salt cedar, which you can recognize in the spring by these vibrant pink flowers if the plant is doing well. And I'll show you some other pictures of it later on in this presentation. Next is Russian olive, which is super common in this area too. It's actually kind of a pretty tree, but it really takes over. It has really spiny leaves to it. Russian knapweed is another noxious weed that's really common to this area that we'll talk a little bit about. It's really prone to disturbed areas. And then there's some other common ones there on the bottom. So here's really what tamarisk looks like in this area. It's super dense thickets along rivers, no plant diversity. It blocks access for recreation and wildlife. These plants really have a dramatic landscape scale impact across the West. They were originally brought over from Eurasia as an ornamental wind barrier and initially placed near rivers to help reduce erosion. It spreads both by seed and roots and can be dispersed by water or wind. So change of flow regimes across the West, primarily because of water development and dam building that limit the magnitude of spring floods that I was talking about earlier, have allowed these plants to really thrive and take off at the amount that they have. So when we're looking at restoration, we want to see diverse multi-storied vegetation. So this is our goal. We aim to return these places to more diverse and thriving ecosystems that they once were, or something similar. So you can see in this photo that there are multiple stories of vegetation. Grasses in level 1, shrubs in level 2, and on that third level, large mature trees that all provide different habitat for wildlife. Having different vegetation species allows diverse animal species to live and thrive off of them for habitat and food. All animals want diverse food sources and habitats just like we do. The problem at hand is that invasive species like tamarisk and Russian olive have invaded these areas and are outcompeting them on every single level, drastically reducing the diversity and as a result degrading wildlife habitat and a list of other negative impacts I'll talk about here in a second. So the next time you pass by a river, you can take a look at the riverside habitat and decide whether it's healthy or not based on how many different plant species that you see there and the spacing between them. So here's an example. This is the Escalante River down in Utah of a river that's choked by Russian olive. And as you can see, access is near impossible. The river is really being choked and channelized. So if higher flows were to come, they wouldn't have space to expand into the floodplain. This is after restoration, and you can see it's so much healthier. You can actually see the landscape behind it, how the river has room to move. There are a much different, diverse array of plants there, so a much healthier river. And here's an example of just a few of the good plants. Willows, cottonwoods, box elders, buffalo berry provides great food for a lot of species. Warming saltbush, some bighorn sheep eat that. So these are some good ones. It's also good to keep an eye out for. Before we move on to what we do at RiversEdge West to manage these invasive species, I'm going to talk more specifically about their impacts. So we already talked about how they decrease plant and wildlife diversity, but they also invade farm and ranches, reducing the value and productivity of land in terms of soil quality, water and sun availability, and beneficial bugs, especially pollinators. So, and also due to these dense thickets, people can no longer access riverfronts. Boaters find that former campsites and beaches have been invaded and overrun by invasive plants. So these invasive plants consume more water than native plants, especially because there are so many of them growing in the riparian area when historically you wouldn't have as densely packed vegetation. So to clarify, they do consume more water due to the fact that they grow more densely and live higher up on the banks, where you normally have species like rabbitbrush and sagebrush that consume a lot less water. Tree for tree, however, cottonwoods versus tamarisk, they consume about the same amount of water. However, because they grow in such greater numbers and have such longer root systems, it's a much bigger issue. Since we can't be here in person, I'm going to use this little simulation made by NASA to show you what I mean. So here you can see how big the root systems are and how quickly they propagate along the banks, and much, much higher than these cottonwoods on river left. And you can see the river shrinking, and as the water table gets lower and lower, the cottonwoods are unable to reach it anymore and die out. Secondly, tamarisk have a lot of salt, and they're able to pull salt through their roots. So here's another animation that shows how they bring salt from really, really far down in the ground and reduce the soil and water quality as a result. So you can see it being sucked up with the water and distributed to the leaves, and as the leaves fall, they slowly degrade into the soil, making it a lot more saline. And as some of you may know, invasive species really increase the risk of wildfire. We've seen this in the Grand Valley, in particular in 2018 at Cameo and Skipper's Island, both along I-70, where it burns super hot and also just ruins cottonwoods and other areas, and as well as reducing the water quality. So that's a huge reason to get rid of tamarisk, to protect our communities and rivers from really extreme wildfire. So now that we've covered how these plants degrade riparian ecosystems, you're probably wondering how to get rid of them. So we try to use an integrated approach to managing tamarisk to create resilient rivers. That not necessarily meaning removing massive stands at once, given the vast disturbance that can create. Some birds utilize tamarisk because it's the only thing around, and some just enjoy them. So we're really careful about the time of year removal occurs and at what magnitude we take out tamarisk. The first mechanism is mechanical removal. First, just using chainsaws, very straightforward, cutting the tree down. Oftentimes we use local youth conservation corps who have these skills. Next, we sometimes hire contractors. This picture on the bottom is what's called a mulching head. So that comes in and just totally kind of chips up to an extent the plant and is able to pile it up. This third one at the top is an excavator that's able to literally pluck the tamarisk and take out its root system. That tends to have the least amount of regrowth, but can cause a massive amount of disturbance, so that noxious weeds tend to come up like Russian knapweed. Next, chemical control is necessary on a lot of these plants. So immediately after cutting them with a chainsaw, we're able to apply herbicide, and we mix blue dye in with it, that's why it's blue, and put it directly on the root system, so it really doesn't impact other plants at all. It's very targeted, and the root system is able to pull that herbicide down and kill the plant. The third method to manage tamarisk specifically is by using a biological control. So when settlers brought tamarisk over from Asia in the 1800s, one of the things they didn't bring was one of the tamarisk's natural predators that would help keep its population in check. So after massive amounts of research and testing, the USDA released the tamarisk beetle in 2001 to help control the spread of the plant. They don't eat anything besides tamarisk. So we don't release the beetle, but we just track its movements, and it's very, very widespread. Here's an example of what a river looks like before the tamarisk beetle came along and afterwards. So they don't like completely eat the plants, they just degrade them quite a bit and reduce the vigor of the plant. So while the beetle doesn't quickly eradicate the tamarisk single-handedly, it virtually eliminates the flowering and significantly weakens the plant, so that mechanical and chemical controls are more effective. They eventually die, they become hollow and brittle and break off, but it does take many years. You can think about what the reason they don't completely kill it right away is, why would a species eliminate their entire food source? But you do see native plants start to come up through the dead tamarisk, as you can see in that final picture, which shows the importance of them to be used in concert with mechanical and chemical methods. You can learn more on our website, and actually we're going to have a webinar in mid-May that just specifically talks about the tamarisk beetle if anyone's interested in learning more. So finally, I'm going to talk about how RiversEdge West helps to restore rivers. So we have 3 pillars that we base our work on: collaboration, education, and technical assistance. We're working towards our vision of healthy riparian ecosystems. So we predominantly help a diverse group of people throughout the entire West responsible for managing rivers to succeed. This looks like organizing meetings to connect stakeholders and share information about restoration projects and priorities, helping out land management agencies with their workloads and management, keeping track of all restoration happening in a given watershed, and different kinds of treatments to share lessons learned, writing grants to help support this work, planning on the ground implementation, talking with partners, and tons of other ad hoc tasks. And our niche is really working on rivers that are impacted negatively by invasive plants and helping folks steward segments of riparian areas back to health. We're part of the overall team of organizers working to restore rivers, which include land management agencies, scientists, landowners, schools such as CMU and Fort Lewis, counties, municipalities, and many others. So we're pretty small. There's just 9 staff, 6 of us are in Grand Junction, and 3 of us are elsewhere in the West. Our board of directors span the West from Arizona and Kansas, New Mexico, and California. So we're pretty proud of the geographic footprint we have despite being a pretty small team. So we work to restore rivers by first, of course, planning and fundraising. We have to know exactly what needs to be done and how much it costs. We lead and support the invasive management removal by working with youth conservation corps, like I had mentioned previously. We conduct and promote the research of restoration. We do a lot of monitoring and try to connect with research that's going on. Finally, we do a lot of educating, evaluating, and sharing lessons learned. And a huge component is just inspiring the communities to be stewards of land and water. Now that you know how much rivers do for communities, it's just so rewarding to be able to give back and restore them. So collaboration is really central to what we do and is becoming more and more important in watershed management as a whole. In watershed management, it's so important because of how many different landowners and managers and counties and municipalities and states exist within a single watershed. And watersheds don't care about boundaries, so we need to find these partnerships to bring all those folks together. So partnerships we lead are very central to are the Desert Rivers Collaborative, which is the one in Grand Junction and includes the Colorado and Gunnison rivers. The Dolores River Restoration Partnership, as I mentioned earlier, that's down in southwest Colorado. And the White River Partnership up just north of us and into Utah. We help lead networks as well, which are all over the country and really lessons learned and led by practitioners. And we support so many partnerships in Utah and Arizona as well. Here's a picture that really shows the geographic scope of what we do. So we lead partnerships and we support others. And it's really helpful to have such a geographic scope to help folks know what works and what doesn't work. Here's the Desert Rivers Collaborative focus area, the DRC, which is in Mesa and Delta counties along the Gunnison and Colorado River. So this is, if you go down to the river, you can see a lot of projects that we've played a part in. The partnership has. We work a lot with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, Fruita Grand Junction Palisade, Mesa County is a major partner, and so many others. Here's an example of a project that we've done. This is Watson Island, and this is what it looked like in 2008. So, no one can reach the river, super unhealthy, so packed, super fire risk. And this is after we did a large project in 2011. And as you can see, it's so much healthier. There's a lot more space. The fire risk is low, and folks can actually come down and enjoy the river. Here's another example in Palisade at Riverbend Park. In 2011, it was a really big water year, and it washed out a huge piece of the bank. So folks went in with riprap, as you can see on the right, with all these rocks, and we strategically planted willows along it. So as you can see, it really protected the bank and the park itself and that walkway. And it's just a much healthier riparian area, and work continues to happen there to this day. I also briefly wanted to talk about the Dolores River Restoration Partnership that I help to co-lead. It's been around for just over a decade now, and it's been hugely successful in the vast acreage of tamarisk that's been removed and how many sites are doing a lot better now, and you see a lot of the native vegetation coming back, and so much better for recreators and wildlife alike. We've removed around 2,000 acres of initial tamarisk and thousands of acres of secondary weeds, and we do have a really robust rapid monitoring program. And also the partnership itself is just very successful. It's through 6 counties, 2 states, 4 BLM field offices, lots of private landowners, and we're able to engage a lot of students and volunteers and conservation corps every year. And it's really fun to see the momentum continue after so many years. Education is extremely important to us as well. We're lucky to work here in the Grand Valley with an amazing outdoor classroom at our fingertips. Cara Kukuraitis, who I think some of you have actually heard from before, is our outreach and education coordinator. And she does amazing things with various youth classrooms. She organized the Riverside Stories, which was about a handful of our stakeholders across the West and how they connect with rivers. And then we have events such as our annual Raft the River, which will be in August this year, which we just take a bunch of folks down the river and teach them about what we do and then have a really fun potluck afterwards. So that's a great way to get on the river and experience that amazing environment. Next, we do a lot of technical assistance, and that just means providing resources to whoever needs them. On our website is a great hub if you're ever looking for anything riparian restoration. We also field a lot of questions every week from folks who are either doing a tamarisk project or are looking for where to buy plants or the whole gamut. So we're just an overall resource for people that are interested in riparian restoration. As I mentioned earlier, the tamarisk beetle monitoring program, we work with among 80 partners across the Southwest and coordinate as to track the beetles distribution. And then we'll make a map each year as well based on those partners' data to share with everyone. And it's kind of fun to track all that, and it's definitely worth looking at this year's map. And just Finally, the long-term stewardship is so important, and why our organization and all of our partners are so necessary, because restoration is not immediately realized. It takes years and years to see a site come back fully to a healthy state. So it's really important to have consistency in watershed groups and partners to be able to continue to fund and support the restoration of these areas, and get the community involved, because as they're aware of the health of riparian communities, they tend to be better stewards. And one of our major components that we have each year is our annual Riparian Restoration Conference. Every other year, it's held in Grand Junction, generally at CMU, where we're able to connect researchers and land managers and students to our work, and everyone can share their work, and it's just an amazing venue for folks to talk and communicate through this pretty small sector of science. We do a lot of workshops and field trips for private landowners or students, or plant ID workshops, and it's just so important to go out in the field to see what's going on and what constitutes a healthy river. Through our website, and we do a lot of informative newsletters. It's important to stay abreast of what's going on. Building relationships with the right folks and being able to make connections all help to bolster restoration. A couple areas of research where we're trying to learn more about is climate change and what that means for our restoration methods, and if maybe different plants start to make more sense within a warming climate. Secondly, we're always interested in learning more about post-fire restoration. As larger and more intense fires become more common, it's challenging to find the best methods to see what works. So as you move forward and are interested in this kind of work, understanding what research is needed could be very rewarding moving forward. And thank you very much. Feel free to reach out to me at any point if you have questions or like to learn more. And I appreciate your time and hope you found this valuable.